Welcome to Truth in My Days, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello folks, welcome to the latest video from Truth in My Days. One of our team members, Pastor Johnny Chow, brought a certain video on YouTube to my attention that he thought I should take a look at. It has an interesting and certainly provocative title, which is this: Why 41 million Christians refuse to vote this year. As I said, a very provocative title. It's posted by somebody called What Do You Meme? Now, I hadn't heard of that group before, so I looked it up. Cross-examined website told us that this is by one John McCray. It says John McCray is the host of the YouTube channel called What Do You Meme?, where he defends the Christian faith against objections to the faith, as well as gives culture commentary from a thoughtful Christian perspective. His goal is to help to articulate what's going on in culture in hopes to help communicate the truth of Christianity and the message of the gospel in a more effective manner in today's culture. So, as far as I can tell, he seems to be a sincere evangelical, and with 480,000 followers on his channel, he seems influential as well. So it's definitely worth looking at his video. The link is provided so that you can see the whole thing for yourself. I did watch it a number of times to make sure I got his arguments down right, that I understood them properly. And so what I'm going to give you now is a summary of his arguments. Now, Mr. McCray starts with showing how many Christians there are out there now, as you're approaching your election in the United States, how many Christians there are out there now who are urging, insisting, even demanding that Christians need to get out there and vote, and they need to vote for the Republican candidate for President, Donald Trump. And they're coming out saying that if you vote for the Democrats, you vote for Kamala Harris, that is a vote for abortion. Now, according to McCray, this is false. He says that this is not really a choice between one candidate who supports abortion and one who doesn't. He points to the fact that Donald Trump agreed with the Supreme Court's decision to allow the abortion pill to be sold in the United States, and that he refused to support a 16-week federal ban on abortion, which means that he is, according to McCray in his words, that he is pro-abortion in 94% of the cases, which is only marginally better, in fact, than Kamala Harris, who's 100% of the cases. And he says that the whole MAGA movement, the Make America Great movement, is right behind the Democrats on a lot of other religious ethics as well, though McCray doesn't specify or back up that latter claim. But he goes on to say that these Christians who are refusing to vote are not voting because either choice would constitute a vote for abortion, and therefore it would violate their conscience to vote. He then turns his sight on Christian nationalism, and he alludes to a couple of studies on his video. One of them, he says, Christian nationalism is actually associated mostly with non-church-going Christians. And then he suggests that the reason they support this idea is because they're out of touch with the Christian community as a whole. They're not getting fellowship with Christians to keep their feet on the ground, so to speak, and as a result, political activism becomes their primary outlet. McCray insists that this is not what the Bible calls Christians and churches to focus on. He asks, does political power bring about the deep, lasting change Jesus envisioned? Citing Jesus' instruction to the Pharisees to clean the inside of the cup, not the outside, McCray argues that true change from within cannot be achieved by changing rules and making laws. Our calling, he says, is not to change the world through politics, but by making disciples. And focusing on politics can distract us from that. He goes on to say then that to claim that the U.S. is in such a parlous state right now that Christians must act, must vote before it's too late and the country falls irrevocably. McCray says that while that might be a threat, focusing on politics, he says, for the church to focus on politics poses an even greater danger to Christianity in America. He airily dismisses this concern about America falling. He points to the fall of the Roman Empire, and he says this was one of the most powerful empires ever. But even when it fell, he said Christianity didn't fall. Christianity continued to flourish, and it did so not because of political power, but because focused on discipleship, on making disciples. He cites a picture where the text reads, by 600 CE, Christianity has spread to most of Western Europe. And so he says, just focus on making disciples, loving your neighbor, and staying strong in the word. And apparently he thinks, let the political chips fall where they may, since politics doesn't bring about the deep, lasting change that transforms lives and cultures. He goes on to say that all this doesn't mean that our fears of possible impending political persecution are unwarranted. But McCray says that even in the worst case scenario, where Christians are silenced and heavily persecuted for our faith, Christianity will still flourish. Why? Because, as he cites Matthew 16:19, Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. Furthermore, he says Christianity often does better when it is persecuted by the state, because in this kind of situation where people's lives are actually at stake, if they're going to put their faith in Jesus, only people who are really serious about the faith will become Christians, and the unserious people will be weeded out of the church. And he leaves us with this. Christ didn't die to give us political power, but to save us from sin and to reconcile us to him. His death and resurrection are the foundation of Christianity, not who holds political office. He reiterates that when Rome fell, Christianity survived not because of politics, but because of the holiness of his people. If we fail to focus on discipleship above politics, we've already lost the fight. That's his warning to us. So, what do we think of McCray's case? How should I put this? Well, succinctly, he is wrong. Spectacularly wrong. Thoroughly wrong. With the exception of a very few axiomatic Christianity 101 facts, McCray is wrong on everything. And we'll show why. Is the death and resurrection of Jesus the foundation of our faith? Certainly, yes. Did Jesus die to save us from sin and reconcile us to himself? Yes. Does Jesus mandate that we should make disciples? Again, yes. As I said, this is all Christianity 101. And McCray is right about these things, and he is wrong about everything else. See, at the heart of his case is a colossal false dichotomy, which is, of course, a logical error. And this is his false dichotomy. He acts as if Christians either are focused on making disciples, or they are focused on pursuing political power. It's one or the other. And according to McCray, those who insist you must vote in this election must be in the latter camp. But this, folks, is arrant nonsense. How does the insistence that once every 2 years you should take a couple of hours of your time out to vote mean that you're actually more interested in politics than in discipleship? That voting time will eat up about 0.0057% of your time, or about what McCray would spend taking his family out to dinner once. So please explain how a Christian who is heavily involved in ministry, evangelism, outreach, apologetics, and discipleship throughout the year, how would we say that he must be putting his hopes in politics above the mandate to make disciples because once every 2 years he spends a couple of hours voting? How does that possibly make sense? It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. This dichotomy that you're either trying to fix society through politics or you are doing Christian discipleship, and if you're voting, you are trying to fix the world through politics. Sorry, that's just nonsense. McCray displays the front page of a study from something called Sociological Forum. The article is called Unchurched Christian Nationalism in the 2016 U.S. Presidential Election. Well, that has nothing to do with his topic now about how Christians are refusing to vote in 2024. And it's about Christian nationalism, which he calls this push to blend faith and politics. Okay? Now, I would suggest that McCray be careful about tossing that term about. Christian nationalism has no real fixed definition, and it's generally used to blacken Christians by the mainstream media, by secular writers. Basically, if you're conservative, if you are anti-abortion, if you believe in traditional male-female roles, then you are a Christian nationalist. So I would avoid using that kind of term. But even by McCray's definition, the push to blend faith and politics, again, I have to ask, how is saying that Christians should vote blending faith and politics? It does no such thing. As a citizen, you have the right to vote, you exercise your right. How is that impinging upon your ministry? Well, this means then that the linchpin of McCray's argument is completely wrong. It's a false dichotomy, and not surprisingly, his whole argument then collapses like a cheap suitcase. Because it's not only the linchpin. As I said before, everything he says is wrong. Before we look into the rest of his case, though, let me present a counter case, the opposite view, why I think Christians should vote. First, let's look at Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Here we read, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." This is where we read about the role of government. Now, in New Testament times, when Paul was writing this, the governing authority was the emperor, the Roman emperor. He was an absolute dictator, and in those days it was the same all around the world. There was no such thing as democracy. Every state was ruled by an emperor or a king, an absolute ruler, dictator. People had very limited rights, the average person. Roman citizens, if you had citizen status in the Roman Empire, then you did have some rights. Paul was a Roman citizen. He was born in the city of Tarsus. Tarsus was a citizen city. Anybody born there automatically had Roman citizenship. As we read through the book of Acts, we find 3 records where Paul uses his political rights. Okay? The first is in Acts chapter 16, where he's in Philippi and he's being beaten and put in prison. And the next morning, people come to him and say, "Okay, you can leave now." And then Paul points out, "You know what? I'm a citizen. How dare you have done this to a citizen?" And then the locals become very much afraid. And Paul says, "Make that magistrate has to come and get me out himself." Okay? And that's what happens. You see again in Acts 21 to 22, where Paul has gone back to Jerusalem despite the warnings of Agabus, the prophet. He's gone there, and not surprisingly, this riot starts, and the mobs are planning to kill him, and the centurions, some Roman soldiers, show up and rescue him, and they're about to flog him. He says, "You can't do this to a citizen." At that point, the centurion starts becoming a little bit afraid. He himself is a citizen, but he bought it. He wasn't born into it. And Paul uses then his rights as a citizen to ask to address the crowd, and the centurion allows him to do that. As a result, he has an opportunity to preach the gospel to this big crowd. Of course, eventually they shout him down. He's under arrest, and his opponents, his Jewish opponents, want him dead. And they set up this elaborate plan where he's going to be called down to Jerusalem to present his case, but they have ambushers on the way. They're going to kill him before he ever gets there, and Paul finds out about that. Doesn't matter, the local governor wants to send him anyway. And Paul then exercises a right. He says, "I appeal to Caesar." Which means the magistrate can't send him now and put him into a death trap. Now, you might wonder, in Philippians chapter 1, verse 23, Paul writes about how it's better to die and be with Christ. Why don't I go for that? Persecution is such a good thing. Like, why doesn't he just go ahead and get himself killed? He's finished his mission, off he goes. Why apply his political rights here to avoid that situation? Would we say that he's blending faith and politics here? Or would we say that he is using his political rights to optimize his opportunities to preach and spread the gospel? Seems pretty clear to me that he's doing the latter. Now, coming back to our times, back to Romans 13:1, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God." Now, as I pointed out, in those days, all dictators, all kings, emperors, limited rights for the people. Those emperors were the authorities. In our society, who is the authority? What kind of governmental system do we have? In the United States, you have a democracy, and specifically a republic, which is a democratic republic. You're not under an emperor. Who is the authority in your system? It is the people, through their representatives. It means you have the job to carry out this task of governing. You are the governing authority appointed by God, and you have the duty to carry out that job to the best of your ability. As a citizen, not a Roman citizen, but an American citizen, you, the Christian, have the same right as any other citizen to advocate and vote for policies you think best, and you should do so. Why wouldn't you? And particularly when the choices between the two options is so very, very stark. I'm not a fan of Michael Licona, but here's how he puts it.
I'm Dr. Mike Licona, professor of New Testament Studies. What I'm about to say are my own words and are not at all intended to represent the university where I teach. I just voted for free speech. I voted for fair elections. I voted for a secure border. I voted for a U.S. government that will place priority of its own citizens over non-citizens. And I voted for strong leadership that will lead to fewer wars and a safer world. I also voted against a two-tier system of justice. So I voted for the only viable candidate who represents these views. I voted for Donald Trump.
So, the difference between the two options is indeed very stark. What happens if you don't vote? What if you don't choose to exercise your right and your duty to vote? Well, let's consider the parable of the trees from Judges chapter 9. And it goes like this, starting at verse 8. The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go sway over trees?" Then the tree said to the fig tree, "You come and reign over us." But the fig tree said to them, "Should I cease my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over trees?" Then the tree said to the vine, "You come and reign over us." But the vine said to them, "Should I cease my new wine, which cheers both God and men, and go to sway over trees?" Then all the trees said to the bramble, "You come and reign over us." You see, that's how you get the worst leadership, folks. When you let the great become the enemy of the good. When you say, well, we don't have a great candidate, so we just won't vote at all. And if Christians don't do their job, they don't vote, guess what? The evil people still will. Okay? When the Christians step back and say, we're not going to participate because we don't have a great option, then what's going to happen? You're not going to get a good option like the olive tree or the fig tree or the vine. You're going to get the bramble. Okay? The evil people will still vote, and who's going to triumph in that case? Okay? You're going to get evil leadership. How is that better? How is that better for the cause of Christ, or for anything for that matter? Do remember famous maxim attributed to Edmund Burke, wrongly, but it is attributed to Edmund Burke usually, that says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Okay? I'm not sure that this is good advice to say that, look, we should do nothing and just let the society go around us as it does. What happens if we do that and things go bad? We have a chilling picture of this in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 9. It's a vision that was given to Ezekiel the prophet. It goes like this. Then he called out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, "Let those who have charge over the city draw near, each with a deadly weapon in his hand." And suddenly 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a battle axe in his hand. One man among them was clothed with linen and had a writer's inkhorn at his side. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub, where it had been, to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed with linen, who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, "Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it." To the others he said in my hearing, "Go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eyes spare, nor have any pity." And then he goes on to say, "But do not come near anyone on whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the elders who were before the temple. Think about it, folks. Who was spared here? Who was given that mark of protection? Those who sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. People who were so sad about the evil that was being done in their society. But all they could do was sigh and cry. They couldn't do anything about it because they lived under an absolute monarchy. Sighing and crying was all they could do. You can do more. Okay? You can vote. Okay? I wonder how it will go with you who do not do that. Okay? You sigh and you cry and you lament and, oh, this stuff is so bad, but you don't actually do something about it. Do remember that the judgment begins with the leaders of the people. The ones who take on that mantle of teacher. Okay? if you do that, you had better make sure you're teaching what is right. James 3:1 warns about that. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive the stricter judgment. Okay? So in sum, it seems pretty clear to me that Christians should vote, and they need to do it wisely. Okay? That's my case. Take it or leave it. Agree or not, up to you. That's my case, why I think Christians should vote. Now let's go through this video from John McCray in detail. See all the places where he goes wrong. Okay. Technically, he goes wrong even before we begin the video with the title, Why 41 Million Christians Refuse to Vote This Year. Where does that claim come from? What's the evidence for the claim? Well, he alludes to two articles. First, there's the one we mentioned from Sociological Forum, Unchurched Christian Nationalism, and the 2016 U.S. presidential election. As we said, this says nothing about the number who don't vote or about this upcoming election for that matter. So I'm not even sure why that article was adduced. The other is the 2024 pre-election research report number 1 from the Cultural Research Center of Arizona Christian University. Now, this article does set about trying to estimate how many people of faith won't be voting. Now, they've done a number of surveys, but I read through the article a couple of times, and it's difficult to see because they don't tell us what questions they asked in the survey. They tell us about the numbers and the stratification. They don't tell us the actual questions. And it seems a bit difficult to know where the number came from. At one point, the article estimates how many people of faith won't be voting. It's an estimate. But what it doesn't do is give the slightest bit of evidence that these people are refusing to vote, as opposed to just not bothering to vote. Okay? The fact is, many Americans who are eligible to vote don't do so. Okay? The average across the last 3 presidential elections is about 39%. Okay? Almost 4 out of 10 don't bother to vote. Okay? Based on those numbers, you'd actually expect closer to 43 million Christians who are not voting this time, not 41, which suggests that actually there might be a little bit more enthusiasm here than there usually is. And every other source I've looked at, that is what I'm seeing. Okay? So when McCray asks, why are so many Christians stepping away from the political process this year? He doesn't seem to realize that this is not so many Christians stepping away from the political process this year. It's actually quite typical how many are not voting. But here's where it gets worse, because McCray answers his own question. Why are so many Christians stepping away from the political process this year? Well, it's not apathy and it's not surrender. The truth is, it's something you probably weren't expecting. And he says for a lot of non-voting Christians, they don't feel comfortable voting for any candidate since they see both as being pro-abortion. It's not apathy, it's not surrender. The truth is, it's a reason you weren't expecting. It's because they think both candidates are pro-abortion. Really? It's interesting that in that very report that McCray brought to our attention, the one where he gets the 41 million from, the article says, quote, the most common reason offered by 2/3 of the non-voters, 68%, was a lack of interest in politics and elections. So yeah, dude, it is apathy. And I'm not sure why you ignore what's said there in your very article. We can't just manufacture a reason that fits our narrative. Okay? Let's go on. Next Okay? Although the numbers in the study adduced by McCray say that abortion is not the reason many Christians are not voting, McCray postures as if it is. Watch this.
The reason why is that not only do non-voting Christians see voting for Harris as voting for a pro-abortion candidate, but they also see voting for Trump to also be voting for abortion, since Trump seems to be pro-abortion in at least 94% of cases. By Trump saying,
The Supreme Court just approved the abortion bill, and I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it.
his own words confirm that he's in full support of 63% of abortions. And if we also acknowledge the fact that he refuses to support a 16-week ban, this means that Trump is pro 94% of abortions.
This may simply be a difference of opinion regarding tactics rather than substance. I don't know that for a fact, but neither does McCray know that Trump has become pro-abortion. Trump tends to play chess while other people are playing checkers. Like that other great American sin, slavery, the issue of abortion will not be settled quickly. Unfortunately, there are a lot of, dare I say it, evil people in the United States, people, yes, evil, who insist on the freedom to kill preborn babies in the womb. Just as there were so many people in 1860 who were supporting the enslavement of black people. Now, Trump was rightly called the most pro-life president in history during his first term. And the most significant thing he did along those lines was to appoint 3 strict constructionist judges to the Supreme Court of the United States. And those 3, 2 years after he departed, struck down Roe v. Wade, that horrible, wrongly decided Supreme Court decision back in 1973 that legalized abortion throughout the entire country and made it impossible to ban it anywhere. This Supreme Court, in the Dobbs versus Jackson decision with the 3 judges appointed by Trump, ended Roe v. Wade and threw the decision about abortion back to the state level. And since then, about half of American states have put restrictions on abortion or banned it outright, thus saving thousands of lives of preborn children. So now is the time for pro-life groups to do their jobs, to change hearts and minds the way that McCray calls for, and so that abortion can be banned everywhere, using this reprieve that Trump has given them. Why not ban it outright? Why not pass that 16-week ban, as McCray seems to think Trump should be doing? I think he's missing something here. Trump could possibly do that. And what would happen? For 4 years, you'd have that ban, and the very next administration then would come in and repeal the Trump ban. They would codify Roe v. Wade as federal law, and that would be the end of pro-life attempts. It would just be this back and forth thing where, depending on the administration, that determines the policy. I wish it weren't, but the battle against abortion is a long game. And if we let the great become the enemy of the good, as McCray, I think, is inadvertently pushing for, we will surely lose. And here's a real problem with what McCray is saying besides that. Repeatedly, throughout his video, he urges us not to focus on politics, saying that no real solution can be found through politics, because why? Does political power bring about the deep, lasting change Jesus envisioned, he asks. No, he answers. Politics doesn't bring about the deep, lasting change that transforms lives and cultures. Our calling is not to change the world through politics, he says, but by making disciples. And get this one. True change from within cannot be achieved by changing rules and making laws. True change cannot be achieved by changing rules and making laws, and yet he is bashing Trump for what? For not changing rules and making laws. To restrict abortion. Rules and laws that will not bring about the true change, and so would soon be reversed. So McCray is bashing Trump for not doing what McCray says we shouldn't be doing. How does that make sense? This is why I think he hasn't really thought his position through very carefully. And then he says this.
For a lot of non-voting Christians, they don't feel comfortable voting for any candidate since they see both as being pro-abortion. Now, some might respond by saying that Trump's 6% difference from the Democrats is better than nothing.
Really? There's only 6% difference between Harris and Trump on abortion? Christians who think that really haven't been paying attention. Harris has recently gone on record to the effect that abortion is a fundamental right that actually supersedes the First Amendment, that she would restore Roe v. Wade by codifying it as federal law, and she would remove all conscience exemptions. So if you're a Christian doctor or a nurse, you will be forced to participate in the killing of unborn children. If you don't want to do that, you're going to have to resign. Your career is gone. Or you can refuse to participate as a doctor or nurse, and then you will probably face criminal charges. That's what Harris has in store on the issue of abortion. Do you think Trump would do things like that? So do you really think there's only a 6% difference, Mr. McCray? I think you should watch this as well.
You were second in charge of California for 13 years.
As California's Attorney General, Harris promoted enforcement of a law that allowed prosecutors to seek jail time for parents of truant kids.
As a prosecutor in law enforcement, I have a huge stick. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
I thought that was crazy. I was like, how can you lock parents up?
If you don't go to school, Kamala's gonna put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect.
I opened the door and I see at least 7 or 8 cops wanted to arrest me. As a matter of fact, they did.
And frankly, you know the prosecutors in my office who volunteered to do this? My homicide prosecutors. My gang prosecutors. And they went over there and I said, when you go over there, look really mean.
She had me arrested and prosecuted because my handicapped daughter was sick in the hospital and had missed some days of school.
I learned that with the swipe of my pen, I could charge someone with the lowest level offense. That person could be arrested. They could lose time from work and their family maybe lose their job. They'd have to come out of their own pocket to help hire a lawyer. They'd lose standing in their community.
I lost my job and couldn't pay rent, and we got evicted.
Weeks later, I could dismiss the charges, but their life would forever be changed.
I became homeless. We had to move into a motel.
All because of the swipe of my pen.
I don't agree what Kamala Harris did to my mom. And I don't agree with what she's done to
You're now asking us to trust you as first in charge of our country.
I am concerned and focused on big issues. Elementary and middle school truancy is actually a big issue. If we're trying to save the state money. Because of truancy, California public schools lose $1.4 billion a year in funding. I want money.
My message to all Americans, do not trust Kamala Harris.
As men and protectors of women and children.
So you really think, do you still really think there's no significant difference between Trump and Harris? Give your head a shake. Really? Now, the only other thing that McCray doubles down on is his suggestion that if America does fall, and we do get severe persecution, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Christianity will still flourish. Because Jesus said that the gates of Hades would not prevail against the church. And it's a good thing to separate out, as would happen in times of persecution, separate out the non-serious pseudo-Christians from the serious Christians in the church. And again, he refers back to what happened after the fall of Rome to show how Christianity still flourished after that, because they focused on making disciples instead of political power. And on everything he says here, with the exception of one very obvious fact, he is wrong. He is wrong on all of this. He is tragically wrong. Everything, with that one exception, is wrong. But we'll leave that for another video. I hope this one has helped you to think about the issues involved and to decide whether you will vote or not. I think you should, and I think you should do it wisely.